Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Green Socialist Podcast. I expect Angela here. I had trouble getting on. We had a little technical difficulty. I'll just tell you what's on my mind. I think this country's in big trouble because the Democrats won't take on that damn filibuster. And you look at where Obama was the same date, and he had a higher approval rating, had more legislative accomplishments. And what's holding up the easy things the Democrats could do is the filibuster. You know, there's a lot of concern now that the Republicans are passing voter suppression laws, and this For the People Act has a lot of remedies to that problem that would set federal standards that would overrule what they're doing in the states. Now, we have a problem with the public campaign financing program in the For the People Act, but these voting rights could be active. But if they don't get the filibuster repealed, it's not going to happen. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would restore Section 5 of the original Voting Rights Act, requiring pre-clearance for jurisdictions with a history of discrimination, that hasn't even been introduced by the Democrats. And what I'm hearing is they don't think it can stand up legally with the Supreme Court we've got. But rather than fight for it, build public support, and maybe change the balance of power, they just haven't introduced it. There's the Equality Act, which would extend federal protections to protected groups, to people of different sexual orientations and gender identities. Crucial piece of legislation. Passed the House. It's not going to pass the Senate as long as that filibuster's in there. Justice in policing, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Now, we see limitations on that. It concerns qualified immunity, that's good. Some use of force standards, which are good. The problem is, as long as the police themselves, they can get away with violating use of force standards. You know, example I think of is Eric Garner. They banned chokeholds in New York in 1993. He was suffocated to death with a chokehold in 2013. And the NYPD, New York Police Department, did not sanction that officer. So that's another bill. Reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. The Protect Our Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act for labor organizing. So you've got these bills that ought to pass. They're not radical changes, but they're common sense, progressive changes. They can't do anything if they don't get rid of the filibuster. Basically, the Democrats are being punked by the Republicans. Republicans have made it clear they're not going to cooperate with anything. Yet some of these Democrats keep holding out, including Biden, for bipartisanship. I mean, let's stop playing games. It's really the Democrats negotiating with themselves on these bills, and they should get down to doing that. You know, the more conservative elements like Manchin and Sinema are going to maybe cut back on the more progressive elements of what's been proposed, but at least you get something passed. Right now, nothing's passing. There's been fewer legislation passed at this point in Biden's administration than Obama's. And we know now McConnell, you know, his objective was to obstruct everything. And he said it right out in the open. That's what he's doing. Yet the Democrats let the Republicans get away with this. Biden has 54% approval rating. Obama had 63% at this time. So, and then there are the broken promises. $15 minimum wage, student debt relief, the Iran nuclear deal, which the U.S. is conditioning on Iran making some unilateral moves with respect to what they're doing, rather than, you know, getting to the table and figuring out how to put this thing back together. And putting those demands before they even talk directly basically is sabotaging the whole thing. This week, it became clear that, or Biden's administration announced, they are not going to get back into the Open Skies Treaty, which allowed the U.S. and Russians to observe each other's military movements, or the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the missiles treaty, the intermediate missiles in Europe. Now, Trump got out of them. Biden's saying, yeah, we're going to stay out of them. What happened to the public option, expanding Medicare down to 60 or even 55? 125,000 refugees. That was another promise that's been broken. So where are we headed? We're headed toward a midterm where, because of partisan gerrymandering, Republicans are likely to take back the House. And then nothing's going to happen. Nothing could happen, even if you get rid of the filibuster. So where does that leave us? It's pretty clear. Neither party is putting forward a progressive agenda. Obviously, the Republicans are now an extremist party, not just a conservative party, mobilizing people around racism and nativism and irrationalism. You know, COVID didn't happen, or it's a hoax, or the vaccines are no good. Climate change isn't happening. Biden didn't win the election. I mean, they got a whole lot of fantasies out there that in their separate universe, a lot of people believe. And those are the people that may come back into power after these midterms. So where does that leave us as Greens? We got to dig down. We've got harder ballot access than before with an extremist Republican Party. A lot of progressives will settle for that centrist corporate Biden politics, not wanting to take the risk on progressives. So we've got to run local offices where the stakes are lower and build a base, political base there. We got to push for ranked choice voting, including proportional representation through ranked choice voting, where we elect legislative bodies from multi-member districts. So instead of a single member district, which is usually going to be all majority Republican or majority Democrat, and we won't get any seats, when you have multi-member districts, each political viewpoint gets its fair share of representation based on the support it has. That will get Greens into legislative bodies and give us a much stronger platform on which to advance our ideas. I think that's the thing we really got to fight for. The campaign's now going on in 45 states, at least, for ranked choice voting. The thing we got to bring to the table is don't settle for just single district ranked choice voting, because that won't change who's in office. It may change how many votes we get in the first round of instant runoff voting. That's single member ranked choice voting. But in the end, it's going to be the same Democrats and Republicans, because those single member districts are gerrymandered. You can't gerrymander multi-member districts. And there's Angela. So if you look at, say, Australia, where the Green Party is about a 10% party, their House of Representatives, 151 members elected from single member districts using ranked choice voting. They got 10.4% of the vote in 2019. They only got one of those 151 seats. On the Senate side, they have proportional representation through multi-member districts using ranked choice voting. There, the Greens got 9 of the 76 senators. It's about 12%, which is close, roughly proportional to the 10.2% vote they got. That's why it's so important when we get in this ranked choice voting campaigns to insist on the legislative reforms. You got to go to multi-seat ranked choice voting for proportional representation. Otherwise, we'll just cover up how the Democrats and Republicans still monopolize, governance and exclude political minorities like the Green Party, as well as ethnic minorities. The only place where Black folks really get representation is in Black majority districts, which are gerrymandered. As Lanny Guinier used to point out before Bill Clinton dumped her as his nominee for Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, if you settle for just majority minority districts, you're setting a ceiling on the amount of Black political power there can be, because they'll have no influence in the white majority districts. And in the Black majority districts, because it's winner take all, they use the spoiler thing against Black challengers to a Black incumbent and say they're dividing the Black vote, which in a winner take all situation can happen. So that then the politics inside the Black community don't get debated. The incumbents maintain their power and they get all the support from the corporate interests. And so Black politics is messed up by this single member district winner take all system as well. So that's why I think ranked choice voting and proportional representation is the the key thing we can win in the coming period. So I'll stop there and let Angela tell us what's on her mind.
Hey, Howie. Apologies for the lateness. Saturdays are the days that I have to do everything that I can't do during the week. So I really don't have a whole lot on my mind. I mean, everybody knows about the bills attacking people's bodily autonomy with regard to reproductive freedom, both here in South Carolina and in Texas. So that's happening because these people are absolutely unimaginative and complete jackasses as usual. But also just thinking about Pride Month coming up, and making sure that folks are paying attention to all of the attacks on transgender folks that are happening, legislation that's being pushed in different places around the country. Hush and sit down. You got toys, go play with them. Stuff that's being pushed. I think there's 80 something bills that are attacking transgender people that are they're trying to push through around the country. So it's just something I hope that folks are going into Pride Month, that we are paying attention to. And yeah, that's all I got.
All right. First question.
Joshua.
The Democratic Party uses the Republican Party as an excuse not to fulfill their campaign promises. That's right. I wish voters would stop letting themselves be extorted and blackmailed into supporting either corrupt ruling party. Yeah, that's true too. The thing we have to understand is that people are reasonably scared of this extremist Republican Party. So when they vote for the lesser evil, there's a certain rationality to it. And that's why I'm so big on changing the rules. Because when you have single member district winner take all plurality elections, you tend to get a two-party system because people don't want to risk voting for what they really want because they may end up helping what they oppose the most. So what you say, Joshua, is absolutely true. But at the same time, it's probably going to remain true until we can get these rules changed. And I would say that's where we're making progress. I mean, we went into the fall election with about 30 jurisdictions having ranked choice voting. 5 cities passed it. The state of Alaska got a form of it. And since that election, Burlington, Vermont, Austin, Texas, and 23 cities and towns, including Salt Lake City in Utah, are using ranked choice voting this year. So that's something we're winning. And I think we got to build on that. Change the rules.
Dario Bianco, hello. I'm pretty sure, most conservatives support the PRO Act, even when you tell them that taxes would be raised on the wealthy and on corporations. If this is true, why do conservatives still support the GOP?
Well, I would say we don't have many conservatives in the sense that that term meant for the previous half century, which was fiscal conservatism, small government, and a strong military and aggressive foreign policy. What we have now is a Republican Party where those issues, the rank and file doesn't care about them. They really care about this politics of white resentment where the Republicans tell white people that it's, Mexicans taking their jobs, even though it's corporations that move the jobs overseas, and that, black people are taking their positions in colleges and universities or whatever. So they are being mobilized around these cultural resentment issues. So that's to say, I don't know where the conservatives are anymore. There's still some around. Most of them supported Biden. Now, as far as the PRO Act, I don't know. Conservatives tend to not be pro-labor union. at the, political level, the political class level. At the rank and file level, yeah. I mean, I'm a former Teamster. There were a lot of pretty conservative people in the Teamsters, rank and file, who supported having a union, getting a collectively bargained contract. It was good for them. And as far as taxing the wealthy and the corporations, that's popular across the board. You look at public opinion polling, whether people call themselves liberal, moderate, or conservative, they say the rich should pay more and pay their fair share. So then the question is, why do conservatives still support the GOP? I think a lot of them, it's hereditary, it's traditional, and it's identity politics. Rural white people now are Republican. Not because they even know much about what the Republicans are doing, it's just that's what they are. Whereas a lot of urban black folks are Democrat, even though the Democratic Party isn't delivering for them either. And that's where, the way we're going to break through is by having grassroots organization where we talk to people, they know who we are, they see that we're fighting on the issues, and begin to trust us and then vote for us.
Hey, Sol. Hey, darling. Sol Oyas is asking, what do you think about, stop possum, goodness. What do you think about the Dems waiting for 2022 to maybe pick up 2 Senate seats to abolish the filibuster without Manchin and Sinema?
That's bad politics, bad strategy. Where are they going to pick up those 2 senators? Who are they? I haven't really heard that strategy put forward, but if they're waiting, you got to deal with now. 2 years, midterms is a long time from now. A lot can happen. Now you have the opportunity to do it. Manchin, Sinema, it's not just them. It's Feinstein in California. It's Warner in Virginia. There are a bunch of pretty conservative Democrats that really don't want to get rid of the filibuster. So, if Schumer really wants to do it, he should really be putting the heat on those people. And so should the grassroots. Because otherwise, the Republicans are going to take back the House. And that's not because people want the Republicans, it's because of the partisan gerrymandering they're going to do after this census. The Republicans control both houses with 30 state legislatures. They're going to just draw the lines to get more Republican seats.
Eric Gray, hey, sweetheart. Any special topics in particular planned for Pride Month streams?
Nothing in particular. I mean, we've been talking about it, thinking about it, and I'm sure we'll be doing something. We just don't have any particular thing planned yet.
Hey, F button, I'm being good. Could rural whites be converted to economic leftists if we tried different rhetoric? And I think the answer is yes. Howie, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think you've got to speak in a common language. I think you don't put isms forward. People don't vote for isms. They vote for concrete policies. But more than that, they vote for people they trust. And what we got to be doing is talking to these rural white folks about, first of all, listening. What are their issues? What are their problems? And then what does our platform as Greens offer to them that could help solve some of those problems? I mean, we have a Green New Deal for agriculture that would get corporations and Wall Street away from owning farms so that the farmers would have secure tenure. I think that would appeal to a lot of, rural farmers. And then we have a program to support those farmers so they can get off of pesticides and chemicalized fertilizers and all these corporate inputs that are also making them sick. And we support them with parity pricing and subsidies for the transition so they're economically secure. Parity pricing ensures that they have a living income above their production costs. And then as far as the the towns that have been abandoned, where there used to be industry that supported the rural economy. We can bring that back by locating Green New Deal factories in them, including particularly processing the agricultural feedstocks for food and fiber and other products. So, that's an example of the conversation we could be happening. But first thing is we got to talk to people and build relationships. So when they think of us, they don't think of what, Fox News or Breitbart or 24/7 Talk Radio says about us. They say, wait a minute, I know Howie Hawkins, I know Angela Walker, or whoever you are in your communities, and they're not what they're being told. They know you. So I think that's the most important thing to winning over that segment of rural white America that we can win over. We gotta be talking to them, building relationships, working with them so they trust us.
And I want to add to that really quick before we move on. Our friend who recently transitioned, joined the Ancestors, Nikita Slade, covered this exact question on an episode of an episode of Queer Walk podcast. And I'm going to look for that link so that I can share that with y'all, because I think y'all need to hear that, because racism is a problem when we're as part of that discussion. And she talks about, how you can reach people in a way that gets them to understand that the power structure is pitting poor white folks against Black folks, against Latinx folks, against Asian folks, and the way that the system is pimping all of us. And you can have that discussion with people. So I'm going to look for that link so I can share that with y'all.
And she was doing that as a millwright, working with people in the building trades, upstate New York, a lot of conservative white folks. This is Timothy McVeigh country. We got militias and all that. And she was patiently building relationships, talking to people. And unfortunately, she's not with us anymore. She was exemplifying the kind of organizing we need to do.
Hey, Eric, in a state like Florida with a large Hispanic population, and in particular a Cuban population, how would you go about discussing eco-socialism and the Green New Deal?
Well, again, it's about building relationships. And I know that the Cuban population, particularly second and third generation immigrants, families, the younger generation is more open and is actually moving toward a more liberal position. And I would talk to them about those things the way I would talk to anybody about them. Big issue now is jobs. Official unemployment is 9 million people unemployed. You can roughly double that when you count half part-timers wanting full-time work, and people are discouraged because they know their jobs are not out there, and so they haven't looked in the month in which they're counted. And so if jobs is the issue, Green New Deal creates lots of jobs, and young people in particular are concerned about climate change, what it means for our future, particularly in Miami, where a lot of Cubans. Miami's sinking. It's going to be underwater because of global warming. So there are lots of bases to begin talking about these issues. And again, we have to listen and not just go out there and preach. People, they got things on their mind, and they just kind of want to get them off their chest. And just the fact that you listen, they appreciate that. Even if they don't agree with you on policy, they appreciate the fact that you listen and showed concern. So again, we got to get back to that relational organizing or deep canvassing, however you want to call it, where we go out and don't just do a quick flyby canvas to find out if they're going to vote for us in the next election and mark them down on a piece of paper as a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or whatever your system is. We go out and listen and talk and build a relationship, and then be consistently active between the elections. We got to be on these issues all the time. not just when the election rolls around, because then people say, oh, they just want votes. They're not really there. So we gotta build local organizations and be a presence and be talking to people on a consistent basis.
Hey, Amy. Hi, baby. Angela, regarding more attacks on bodily autonomy that I mentioned, how do we challenge the routine blackmail from Democrats to keep the vulnerable trapped with them, despite their own failure to cement reproductive rights? The thing, and I saw this, stop it. I saw this in the chat. And the thing that I thought about when I saw this question in the chat was, you said it. Remind them of their own failures to cement reproductive rights. That, we're in the fix that we are in because of partially because of, I don't want to say their collusion with, although actually I'm going to say their collusion because I had to write my state representative about crossing the aisle and voting for that restrictive abortion bill here in South Carolina. If y'all don't quit, I swear. So I think one of the things, challenging the blackmail from them is reminding them of their complicity in the fact that we are in the position that we are in. Their inability to show backbone, all the times that they, how can I say this? Sold us out, basically, to get whatever it was they wanted, and backpedaled on things that we were asking them to do to make whatever deals that they felt were politically expedient. So, my short answer with this is I have no problem reminding them we're where we are because y'all helped us get here. Howie, what are your thoughts?
Well, that reminds me of another broken Biden promise. Whereas in the course of the campaign, when he was pressured by progressive Democratic voters, he changed his position on the Hyde Amendment, which has had a lot of Democratic support as well as Republican support. And that's an area where the Democrats have been complicit in restricting the right to abortion. Medicaid won't fund your abortion. And so that's one thing. The other is everybody's waiting for the Supreme Court. The Congress could codify Roe v. Wade in legislation, which would change the equation of how the court would have to deal with that issue. We've done that in New York State. Maybe some other more progressive states have. But I don't hear the Democrats raising that demand. I mean, we raised it in the course of the campaign. And again, that's why we need something beside the Democrats, the second party of corporate capital, although right now they're the first party because the Republicans have done lost their mind. And, big business doesn't trust them to act rationally. So now they're all behind Biden and he's acting like it. He was the senator from Delaware where, that's where Michael Cohen set up that limited liability corporation to pay off that bimbo that Trump had a relationship with right before the 2016 campaign because it's low regulation. Low regulation of corporations. That's why a lot of companies incorporate down there. That's Joe Biden's home state. It's where the credit card business is. That's why Joe Biden supported limiting access to bankruptcy for students with debt. And those same people are now, funding the Democratic Party and Joe Biden, and he's acting like he's hearing them. He's being more responsive to his donors than his voters. And when it comes back to abortion rights, I mean, the public opinion polls are clear. Over 60% of people support Roe v. Wade. It's popular. The problem is what the people want doesn't get translated into public policy in this distorted democracy, which brings us back to the democracy question. And I was asked to participate in formulating a voting bill of rights with some mostly progressive Democrats, people that were working on election protection. And I said, of course, there are a lot of things in the We the People Act that we should support. You can drop a long list. It's a big bill. It's incomplete. But I said, first of all, getting into the voting booth is one question. And even the We the People Act, with all it's in it, doesn't call for a right to vote amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Because you remember in Bush v. Gore, the conservative justices said, there is no constitutional, individual citizen's constitutional right to vote. And without that in the Constitution, it's hard to enforce all the things that the For the People Act wants to institute. If it was in the Constitution, then Congress could implement and the courts would be required to enforce that right to vote. So, but then the other thing is, and this is what concerns us, because it's not just the Republicans suppressing the vote, the Democrats suppress it by suppressing the Green Party. Party suppression is part of voter suppression. If you get in the voting booth and you can't vote for who you want, what does the right to vote mean? You know, there are dictatorships all over the world where they pick the candidates and let you vote. And we've had that in this country. Boss Tweed used to say, you can vote for anybody you want to, as long as I get to pick the candidates. And that's what we got. The rich folks pick the candidates, and then you get to choose between brand A and brand B, Democrat and Republican. That's why we need a federal fair ballot access standard. John Conyers used to introduce that bill from the late 80s until 1999. But then after the 2000 election, he dropped it. But that would have set much lower standards, much lower thresholds for getting on the ballot. And it would still be more than most other countries, but it'd be a lot easier than it is now. That's one thing. It's called the Fair Elections Act. Then we need the Fair Representation Act, which would require the House of Representatives to be elected by proportional representation, ranked choice voting for multi-member districts. And then you could vote for that green because you like what the green says without worrying about helping that Trumpy because of the, spoiler problem, winner take all. And then the other thing is, we got to get rid of the Electoral College or regulate it. Now, I didn't realize we could do this. There's an article coming out soon from Rob Ritchie at Fair Vote and some of his colleagues and some lawyers, and they point out under the Constitution, sections 1 and 4 of Article 1 and the 12th Amendment gives Congress the right to regulate presidential elections. So we don't have to amend the Constitution to regulate the Electoral College. And what they propose, and they've got draft legislation in this article, is that Congress pass a law saying that we're going to have a national popular ranked choice vote for president and require that the states cast their electoral votes for the winner of that ranked choice national popular vote. Could be done by legislation, which is much more feasible politically than amending the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. So there are three things that I think we should be fighting for. So we don't only just have the right to get in the polling booth, but once we get there, we have the right to vote for who we want.
Hey, nobody. Does the Green Party plan to create a national bank that charges very low interest for business loans and housing loans, similar to Proudhon's National Bank?
We do call for public banks. Proudhon's bank was more a cooperative bank, which producers and consumers would own. So it's more like a cooperative, in my recollection. But yeah, we need public banks at every level, municipal, state, and federal, where the bank operates at cost and for the public benefit rather than for profit of private interests. And then loans would be, lower interest for both business and housing, and particularly for the kind of investments we want to make in a clean energy economy. So, yeah, we need public banking, and also we got to stop bailing out these too big to fail banks on Wall Street. If they fail because they took high risk, which they're doing right now with all their derivatives, and instead of investing in real production in the real economy. They're engaged in all these kind of speculative financial schemes. There are bubbles out there. If they blow up, we should not bail them out. When they fail, we should take them over at lower cost and reorganize them to be public banks operating in the public interest.
Told I am. Hey, just ignore my dogs, y'all. That's all I got to say. I don't know how they got in here. I had the pet gate up. They went around it. So here we are. Howie.
They're a good model for the Green Party. We need their energy and their way to get around barriers.
They absolutely did. Like, I put it up over here and they went around the back and I didn't realize, that it was open. I usually am more careful than that because here we go. Stop. Howie, how exactly should we end the wars? Could a president order full 100% withdrawal on day one, for example? What would you want a president to do on wars?
Well, the way we end wars is to stop fighting them. Most of the wars we're in are wars of choice, aggressive wars in other people's countries, basically to defend the interests of global corporations, their interests in cheap labor, access to resources and markets. So could a president order a full 100% withdrawal on day one, for example? Well, the amount of power the presidents have taken with respect to the military, a president could try it. I mean, then Congress would probably say, wait, we got some rights here too. So you'd have a fight on your hands. What would you want a president to do on wars? Basically get elected with a mandate to get out of them and transform this country from a global military empire into a humanitarian superpower. Provide aid instead of arms, make friends instead of enemies. And that would do more to enhance our peace and security and the world's peace and security than having over 800 foreign military bases, special ops intervening in over 100 countries a year, and about a dozen active shooting wars where we have conventional forces, not to mention these mercenaries we contract, the people that Eric Prince and Blackwater, although he's changed the name of that company a bunch of times, get hired to do. So the biggest problem a president will face is that there's a whole power structure in the military industrial complex and the national security state, including intelligence agencies with their covert operations, their secret enterprises and sources of money. How do you dismantle them before they dismantle you? And what that really requires, that's why I say you need a mandate and a popular mobilization, because in the end, the power structure is not going to want a president to do that. But the way the power structure won't be able to stop the president, and they could do it. I mean, look what happened to Allende in Chile. Getting elected doesn't mean you have the power. It means you're in office. The power comes ultimately from the people, which means, like we saw with Trump's attempt at a little coup, military said, no, we're here to protect the Constitution, not Donald Trump. And that's the kind of appeal we have to make to the rank and file of the armed forces and the staffs of the intelligence agencies. And they're going to split, but hopefully they're going to split more to our side than the power structure side. So it's one thing to say, cut the military budget, get out of these wars. But then you got to realize that there's a whole power structure. And it's not just the formal armed forces and intelligence agencies. It's these big arms contractors. We're selling arms all over the world, not just to our own Pentagon. And those companies, they have their own private security forces. They have their own spies. I mean, this is a very difficult problem. And what's missing is a peace movement that's not only saying get out of the wars, but understands that we got to dismantle most of the national security state in the military industrial complex and scale it back to legitimate intelligence collection and defending our own country, which is not that big a task given that we got two big oceans separating us from most of the rest of the world. And Mexico and Canada, they're not going to invade the United States. It's ridiculous to think about that. So, but again, we need a movement that understands what we got to do. It's a radical transformation. And, it's not even being talked about. The left goes out and does their little protests of this or that war. The presidential debates had no discussion of foreign and military policy. It's not discussed in the corporate media. So it's a big problem. And, getting elected president would really depend on your mandate and what the people want you to do and their willingness to back you up.
Hey, Diana. Hi, boo. Howie and Angela. Could Biden abolish the filibuster through an executive order? I mean, I don't think he wants it abolished, of course.
Yeah, if he wanted it abolished, he'd be speaking up a lot more. We'd be hearing reporting about how he's putting pressure on Schumer and the other Democratic senators to get on with it. Now, the way it has to be changed is 51 Democrats in the Senate, which includes Kamala Harris, have to change the Senate rules and get rid of the 60-vote cloture rule. Cloture is like in Robert's rules calling the question. And in Robert's rules, it takes 2/3 of people saying we've had enough discussion, it's time to vote. In the Senate, it takes 60 votes. It's not a percentage, it's 60 votes. So like you saw this vote on the commission to study what happened on January 6th. The vote was 54-35. It's about a dozen Republicans and a couple Democrats had already left town for Memorial Day weekend. But a 54-35 vote, the 54 lost because of this cloture rule. They needed 60 votes to close the question, and then they could vote on the commission. But Biden can't do it by executive order. It has to be a vote of the Senate Democrats. And they got the 51 if they can get all the Democrats on the same page. But the problem is, as I think I mentioned here, this is my second podcast today, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but you got Manchin, you got Sinema, you probably got Feinstein, you probably got Warner, and probably some other Democrats who are quiet about wanting to keep the filibuster. So, like I said, the Democrats are negotiating with themselves. The Republicans are irrelevant. They've made themselves irrelevant by saying, we're going to oppose everything you do. So why the Democrats even try to bargain with them is beyond me. I mean, yeah, if there's some Republicans on some issues that want to be constructive, like Murkowski in Alaska maybe, yeah, fine. Bring them into the room and have a discussion. But the idea that you're going to win over 10 Democrats for anything, Republicans for anything in the Senate is just not in the cards now. So stop playing and get on with getting rid of the filibuster. And Biden, if he really wanted to do that, he'd be letting it be known, and he hasn't.
Audra Walton, hey, baby. Do you believe the fiat currency system is crashing? Specifically the dollar. If it crashes, what does that mean for neoliberal capitalism? That's a dang good question.
Yeah, I don't think fiat currency is crashing. There is a problem that for the dollar being the dominant currency in the world, other countries are looking for alternatives because it gives the U.S. so much power in the world economy. So like a lot of the trade between Russia and China now is not done in dollars, but in their own currencies. And more countries are moving to that, particularly those that were sanctioning. So it's not so much the fiat currency. That means the government issues the currency. It's more our country's going to use our currency because we've got sanctions on so many of them and they're looking for alternatives. Now, what that would mean for the dominance of U.S. capitalism or the United States really is serious. I don't think we're close to that tipping point yet, but it's certainly, you can see it coming. And, our problem, at least my problem, is not neoliberal capitalism, it's capitalism. Neoliberal is we're going to cut back regulations, we're going to spend less in the public sector, we're going to subsidize the rich folks with tax breaks and subsidies, corporate subsidies. But it's still capitalism, which is, seeking profits from the exploitation of labor. And more these days, getting more money by extracting it through rents, economic rents, in other words, unearned income, by incurring debt. payday loans, financial speculation on Wall Street. All these things are ways that after we've been exploited at work and we've created goods and services and we got our wages, then they're trying to take more of it from us through these financial schemes. And that's become a bigger part of the way capitalists get profits these days than the exploitation of labor. It's almost going back to feudalism. One of the big assets they monopolize to extract from us is land, which is what feudalism was about. So land values rise, not because the owner did anything, but because property values around or investments around. And that land value, as somebody pointed out in the 19th century, I think it was John Stuart Mill, these landowners make money in their sleep. They don't do anything. That should be taxed away. That's the old idea of Henry George, the land value tax. So what I'm saying is, it's not just neoliberalism, it's capitalism itself that we've got to be opposed to.
Hey, Eric. Eric Gray is asking, what is the best way to explain the actual political spectrum to the everyday person?
Well, the spectrum we got left and right comes from the French Revolution, where the people that wanted democracy, their slogan was equality, liberty, fraternity, or you could say solidarity, to be gender neutral. And the right wanted the old way, hierarchy, tradition, special privileges for the people born into high classes. Now, the interesting thing today is, in this country, the right, which really does believe in tradition, hierarchy, white privilege, or other kinds of privilege, uses the rhetoric of the left. They say they're for freedom and equality and community, family values, and all that. So what I would explain is, it goes back to the French Revolution. And then you got to figure out who's really for freedom, equality, and solidarity. Whose program really implements that. And you'll find that the left does and the right doesn't. That's the way I try to explain it.
Luca Denouncer, hey, boo. What are your thoughts on liquid democracy?
I don't know what liquid democracy is. All I can think of is everybody should have the right to water, and water systems are being privatized, and then people can't get water because they can't pay for it. Water cutoffs in Detroit is a huge problem, but it's probably not what you're asking about. Liquid democracy is a term I'm not familiar with.
That was a good and timely answer, though, Howie. I'm here for that. Linda Templin, hi, sugar. The major parties need their single issue voters. The Dems have to leave reproductive rights vulnerable. The fear of good Lord, fear of the conservative patriarchy keeps Democrat women voting for them. You won't get any argument from me here.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. If the Democrats actually solve some problems, then, the fear that the Republicans will make them worse wouldn't be there. So in a lot of ways, they have a vested interest in keeping the problems alive so they can scare people into keep voting for them.
The whole world knows how badly behaved my dogs are.
Like I said, I like their energy. The Greens should emulate them, particularly that young one. He's the instigator. So Daryl Bianco, with respect to listening rather than preaching, what would you think of developing a more neutral platform that aggregates citizens' votes before voting on bills? Should be attractive to Dems and Republicans. I think you're talking about referenda, citizens' initiatives, or requirements that at least some forms of legislation have to go to the people for approval. There used to be in left platforms 100 years ago a requirement that to go to war, you had to have a national referendum. I think that's something that should be considered, particularly at the local level, where you can set up citizen assemblies like town meetings in New England, where everybody meets face to face, they have equal vote and equal voice, and you can require that their representatives to city councils or county councils have to take account of what the assemblies say. And even if it's not a formal requirement that they go back to the assemblies to get their instructions on voting, the fact that the people have assembled and made their wishes known is going to tell a representative to those councils, they better listen to the people or they're going to get replaced next time. So I think that's the kind of grassroots democracy we should be emphasizing. It's something we can run on in local elections to change our city charters. We have in a lot of places participatory budgeting, but in most cases it's very limited. We don't get to participatorily budget the police department. You know, they let us fight over the community development block grants, which is a small fraction of municipal budgets. You know, that's tokenism. We should have a say in the whole budget, like New England town meetings. You know, in those town meetings up there in New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, Massachusetts, the budget is passed by the people assembled in town meeting. And I've seen them, you know, I used to live up there. They will get all worked up about whether they're going to spend money on a new ladder for the volunteer fire department. And they may go for an hour on that. And then once they've worn themselves out, they'll pass a lot more things with less debate. But at least people have a say, which we don't have now. What we get now is elections, and then the people go to city councils and county councils and state legislatures. And then what they do, most of us have no idea. And that's got worse with the destruction of local media that covers local and state politics. That's a whole nother problem. So in relation to listening and not preaching, that's more in the organizing. You know, you got to go out and not just knock on the door and hand them the leaflet and tell them how great our platform is. You got to say, you know, I'm from the Green Party and, you know, we're here to try to solve some of the problems going on. What do you think of the problems? And what do you think we ought to do about them? And just listen for a while. And then get in a back and forth, and you can relate what they're talking about to what we're talking about. And most important thing is building a relationship and building trust. Because then people, I mean, I've run a lot of local campaigns. There are a lot of people that vote for me because they know I've been around, I've knocked on the door, I've listened to them, and they may not agree or they may not even understand what I'm talking about. But they trust me and they vote for me for that reason. A lot of politics is at the gut level. It's not, you know, a rational calculation. And that's why it's so important for us. We got to get off these screens and out into the streets and face to face with people that we don't even know and start to get to know them.
Hey, Daniel, I saw this in the chat earlier. Daniel Agins, if I butchered your last name, let me know. Daniel Agins is asking, what is the most progressive state as far as the Green Party is concerned? See, that's what y'all get.
Well, do you mean the state's policies or the Green Party's policies? And I hate to rank the Green Parties on how progressive they are. But when I think about states, it's hard to even rank them, because you think of states that vote very, you know, liberally, like Washington State has one of the most regressive state tax systems in the country. New York State likes to say it's the leader in, you know, in progressive policies. It is not. We just had a voter suppression law or party suppression law passed here with no dissent publicly from all these so-called democratic socialists that got elected on the Democratic Party line to the state legislature. or the city council down in New York. I see somebody says Hawaii. Hawaii, Democratic Party there is dominated by real estate interests. And while they may be socially liberal in some things when it comes to Native Hawaiian land rights, they keep taking the land that's been set aside in trust and saying, this is too valuable. We're going to develop it for tourism. And so the Native Hawaiians are having trouble even maintaining their own land. And that state is totally dominated by the Democrats. Virgin Islands, I don't know that much about the Virgin Islands. I know their representative, Stacey Plassett. She is the only sponsor today of the Right to Vote Act amendment that I was talking about. The Right to Vote Amendment Act, to change the federal constitution. A few years ago, they had a lot more sponsors. And she's in the Virgin Islands where she can't even vote in federal elections for senator or president. So, that says a lot about the Democratic Party. I said they had dropped the John Lewis Voting Rights Act because they think Supreme Court will knock it down. What about a right to vote amendment to the Constitution? Why isn't that in the For the People Act? Because that gives you constitutional authority to enforce and implement all those other voting rights in that bill. So, most progressive state. I never really thought about it that way. Every state has progressive traditions. Wisconsin and Minnesota did when they had farmer labor governors, senators, 13 members of Congress in the early 30s. But they got absorbed into the Democratic Party. And they're not as boldly progressive as they were almost 100 years ago. So I don't know. I'm not sure who's the most progressive state.
I don't see no more questions coming. Hold up. Let me check that we're getting the cane. Yes, we are getting the cane from the boss. What are your thoughts, Howie?
The cane. It's the hook. It's the Apollo Theater hook.
That's a cane.
Well, okay. I see. It's like a cane with a handle.
Mm-hmm.
But the hook is what pulls you off
walks
stage.
on it before he uses snatch.
It's not like they beat him with a cane. It's they hook him.
Yeah, he tap dances onto the stage with it, and then it's like wrap it around you and yank you off the stage.
Well, we're closing right at 1 hour. I think it may be partly because we have a double feature today. Our social media coordinator, Chris Blankenhorn, is doing a session on social media for grassroots organizations. And it's going to be streamed on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch, like we are. If you go to the Howie Hawkins Twitter or Facebook page, you will get the link, I think. Let's see if I click on this. No, I just get the picture. I don't know where the link is. Maybe it's the same place. Well, if you go to the Facebook page, it'll be live streamed there. And wherever you watch this, you should be able to watch it, whether you're watching on Facebook or Twitter or Twitch. But anyway, that I think is worth your while. Chris has been, doing our social media and has a lot of knowledge and experience. And so he's going to do that at 5 o'clock today. So I hope people will tune into that. And any parting thoughts, Angela?
I meant to mention it earlier. Sol Oyas, I saw what you included in the chat. They mentioned asking folks to look for the Red Deal by the Red Nation, which I just pulled up. And it is the Red Deal, Indigenous Action to Save Our Earth by the Red Nation. So I think, I thank you, Sol, for giving me my reading for this evening. Folks, if you are also interested pull up the red deal by the Red Nation. And, you know, hopefully next week, we will have, you know, I'll have something to actually contribute. Team Vogue wrote about it, which was dope. The Red Deal is an indigenous climate plan that builds on the Green New Deal. So I am super intrigued. Sol Oyas, thank you for sharing this with all of us. Thank you for y'all putting up with my really ill-behaved dogs. And, you know, as usual, we are, you know, folks are traveling. I saw your comment in the chat about how thick the police are out. I think you're in South Carolina. Diana, was that you down here in South Carolina? Because you know they out like gangbusters down here. So I would expect that they are out in force in other places too. So if y'all are traveling, if you are celebrating, I hope that you will be safe. I hope you'll be, you know, health safe, and also may the police not bother you. So y'all just mind yourselves and stay safe and have fun, because we need that.
Well, my last thought is the weather's getting good and the vaccinations are pretty high. So we can start knocking on doors and doing the kind of grassroots organization building that has been challenged during the COVID pandemic. And now is the time. There's no sense in waiting, because if we're gonna win elections and municipal elections, certainly this year and in 2022 and the year after that, we gotta start building our local chapters up so that they are not just a small group of activists, but they are a mass organization, or at least have mass support, because that's what you need in elections. That's what you need in issue campaigns. So I hope people will think of themselves not just as activists, but as organizers, because that's what we need. We can mobilize the usual suspects, and you get the whole left in a stadium, and it's still going to be ignored. We've got to mobilize a lot more people. That means organize first. So that's my parting thought. And then pace yourselves. You know, those dogs show a lot of energy, but remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, you gotta do something a little bit every day or every week. Not expect to like sprint and get it done and then go on to something else. This is a ongoing commitment. So, you know, find a spot for it in your life and then just keep plugging away.